Hi, this is Chase from CNC Commentaries, and today we're going to be doing another bonus episode. Uh, yes, another one. Today we're going to be talking about The Lord of the Rings. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hold on a minute. Didn't you guys already do the whole Lord of the Rings trilogy? Yes, we did. But this time, we're doing the lesser known, often forgotten 1978 animated film, The Lord of the Rings, that was directed by Ralph Bakshi. I couldn't do this alone. I'm joined by Nando. How's it going, Nando?
Not bad, not bad. We're talking about the animated Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
This one's an oldie. That's for sure. 1978 animation.
Yes, but is it an oldie but a goodie? We will find out.
Yeah, we're about to find out. So yes, this was my first Ralph Bakshi film. God, that last name always gets me.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
I'm just gonna give him the old Ralph. All right, this is my first film by this wacky mind, and
there's certainly a lot of wackier films that I could have started you off with from Ralph Bakshi, but we'll cross that bridge another day.
Yeah, but it's my first film from this man, and it was certainly interesting. This is tackling a big property, The Lord of the Rings, and I believe this was like the first on-screen rendition of The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, at least that I'm aware of, this is the first straight to film version.
Yeah, and you know what? It's certainly interesting. This film. A good thing to point out right at the start here is that this film isn't exactly finished.
Well, it's not finished. We're not going to be going into the whole plot of this, especially because we've already talked about the Lord of the Rings on 3 other episodes. We don't want to sound too much like broken records, but we're going to be, doing, just talking about scenes here and there, and just, talking about how this film came about, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, this is not a necessarily completed story, at least from how Ralph Bakshi wanted to do it, because the film literally ends being like, hey, that was part 1, and then a part 2 was never made because this film didn't do the best financially.
Yeah, it kind of bombed. So a part 2 was never made, so we never got to see the full picture that was meant to be, but we did get a snippet of it. And that's the first film mostly just covers most of the events of Fellowship of the Ring and a bit of the Two Towers, but it doesn't get into the Return of the King territory. Yeah, so this film doesn't get very far, story-wise, in the whole Lord of the Rings, scope, but, you know what, it was planned to be, but unfortunately it didn't happen. So, this is what we gotta live with. But yeah, Lord of the Rings, 1978. So, I don't know. Why don't we dive on in here?
Let's go in. And during this, we're probably going to compare it a little bit to the Peter Jackson trilogy, but I think for us, we're going to try and take a step back from it and try and just, talk about this film on its own as much as we can, because this was the predecessor. And it's obviously the Peter Jackson one had a lot more, technical advances.
Yeah. This is 1978 animation, and some of it is kind of traditional animation, but a lot of it isn't. You're gonna explain the more technical stuff, but there's a lot of interesting techniques used to animate this movie.
This was one of the first major films to use rotoscope animation, which, if you don't know, it's basically, shoot the scene in live action and then animate over it.
Yeah.
And I think that gives us a really unique take and sometimes interesting or frightening look at a character design.
Yeah. that's the thing about this movie is that I've read the Lord of the Rings novels, and this isn't exactly how I imagined it looking. There's definitely a lot of interesting design choices. Let's just say that.
I mean, I think overall you have to applaud this film for how bold it is and how just to take on something of this scope.
Really. It tried.
Yeah, it tried, and to that you got to give it props.
Well, yeah, it tried, but you can't be too mean from a movie from 1978 trying to do something of this scope. They tried their hearts out. And
I mean, I do think the animation is interesting to look at. Like, I'm never bored staring at the screen. There's always something going on, or one shift from one style to another. Like, it either looks like very storybook, or almost like these broad landscapes, or just in the beginning it literally opens with shadows.
Yeah,
and it's
okay. I want to talk about this opening. So in this opening, it starts off with a famous poem, some rings were given to the elves, some to the dwarves, some to the kings of men. I'm obviously paraphrasing, but there's no animation. It's just kind of shadows, against a red background. Like, it's almost like they're playing shadow puppets. The silhouettes of people holding up rings.
And the red background is very foreboding with the lighting.
Yeah, I mean, you put a red background against anything, it's pretty foreboding.
True.
So, the opening is certainly interesting. I think the opening is one of the most interesting parts of this movie, because I think that, I'm not exactly the biggest fan of how many times this movie switches style in its animation, but I think this opening is pretty creative.
Yeah.
I definitely think that it's pretty creative, because I haven't really seen anything like that before.
I mean, yeah, and that's just Ralph Bakshi's unique animation take.
Yeah, this guy's Coco for Cocoa Puffs when it comes to animation. This guy's crazy, and it certainly shows. This is obviously my first film from this guy, but I kind of imagined him as like the mad scientist of animated movies.
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment.
Because I've seen that. You showed me some trailers for some of his movies, and I've watched some of my own, and this is wacko.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is relative. I think this is probably the most accessible to a general audience for him, and even, some closest thing you could get to showing to a child. Although I'd be a little weary of showing a young child if I had some of these scenes. But yeah, you're definitely, Fritz the Cat and wizards aren't the most generally easily accessible to a general audience.
Yeah, I don't know how much LSD this guy was on, but he was on the right amount. So yeah, but past this intro, we're then introduced to our main characters here. You got Frodo, you got Sam, the whole gang, and I think this movie is definitely more book accurate.
Oh, definitely.
Than other iterations. And I mean, I think that's really cool in some aspects, but in others, I think, I don't want to compare it too much to the Peter Jackson trilogy, but it's kind of hard, watching them back to back. But yeah, for example, in the very first, when Frodo meets Gandalf and he comes to the Shire for the first time, and then he sees the One Ring in the book. And in this animated movie, Gandalf leaves for 17 years to do research on the One Ring, and then shows back up to the Shire, and he's like, "Hey, this is bad news." But obviously, in other iterations,
it feels like almost no time has passed.
Yeah, in other iterations, he's gone for like a week, and then he comes back. And he's like, "Hey, you need to go to Mount Doom." So yeah, there's a 17-year time gap right at the start here. And, I think that personally, we're going to talk about it we're going to talk about character designs when we get to things like the Nazgul and Aragorn, Gimli, Boromir.
I mean, we could talk about the different character interpretations now.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gandalf is the best, design in this movie, since Gandalf pretty much pioneered, the old man in a wizard hat.
I mean, yeah, it's hard to mess up
Yeah.
the wise old wizard type.
Yeah, you just give him a snazzy hat, a nice white beard, maybe a staff if you're feeling nice, and there, you got an old wise wizard. But I mean, for other characters, they're not exactly portrayed as I imagined them in this movie. Like, for example, Aragorn kind of looks like a 40-year-old dad, and his armor isn't really armor. Like he's not even wearing pants.
Yeah, it's very short. It's like a leather, like, not tunic, but loincloth.
Yeah, and since this is the Fellowship of the Ring, Gimli and Legolas don't really get to do much here, and you don't get that like love-hate relationship like you do in other iterations. For example, like they gave Boromir a big old beard in this one, and half the time I couldn't even tell Gimli and Boromir apart. And they gave Boromir a Viking helmet for some reason. And Legolas is like super blonde in this movie.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just like it's weird. It's weird to see. Not exactly how I imagined it.
I mean, and another interpretation we were talking about that kind of bugged us in a way was their interpretation of Sam.
Yeah, Sam.
It's kind of like in this version, he's more of like a bumbling oaf. He's basically just there for comedic relief to Frodo.
There's no easy way to say this. He's kind of a bitch in this movie.
I mean, compared to how much we touted we praised him basically in the other trilogy.
Yeah, I mean,
he doesn't do anything. He's basically just he's just there for laughs, and they play him off as if he's just a dummy.
I kind of feel like Pippin and Merry were supposed to be like the comic relief, but in this animated movie, it's more Sam. And even in his design, like Sam, they gave him like a weird kind of scrunched up face.
Yeah.
And they made him like really short, even by Hobbit standards. And I don't know, he doesn't even speak regularly in this one. He kind of slurs all his words. Like, yeah, as you said, he's kind of like a bumbling oaf in this one. I don't know, it doesn't really sit well with me considering how much I love Samwise Gamgee, because, I've always been on record saying that he's the true hero of the Lord of the Rings. But
I mean, yeah, you brought up Merry and Pippin, and I don't feel like they really do anything. I feel like they're basically interchangeable with one another in this.
Especially in like the fight scenes where the camera like switches a bunch and we get all these different shots, I can't tell them apart. Like, for the life of me, if you gave me a test and asked me to find out which one is which during some of these fight scenes, I couldn't tell you. I'd fail. But I mean, it feels like they're just extremely flat. They have only like a couple lines, and they just don't do anything. Like, they're just kind of along for the ride.
I mean, the thing is with this, this film's about, like, what, 2 hours, roughly?
2 hours and 15 minutes.
Yeah. The thing is here, we're not really given the time to go in depth on, like, these characters' backstories, per se. And because of that, we don't feel any emotional weight or stakes for these characters. I mean, especially because if, there wasn't another film after this, which maybe if there was, we would have felt a little more. But, this is 2 hours. This is basically like a sixth of what Jackson was able to do in terms of diving in to...
Ralph had to, like, speed run this movie. Like,
and you can feel his love for the books.
I mean, yeah, you definitely can. You can tell that he cares and that he tried, but he's on such like a time constraint that he just can't do anything.
And also a technical constraint. I mean, I feel like I feel like it was a lot smarter of a move to take this to animation back then than try and do something live action.
Live action, because this would not have been good.
because you can just do so much more with animation in terms of fantasy.
Yeah, like if they tried to like doing this live action in 1978 would pretty much have proved to be like technically impossible.
Well, I know back in the day the Beatles wanted to make a Lord of the Rings film and have Stanley Kubrick direct it.
Now there's a timeline in some parallel universe
Yeah,
where that
that would have been a hell of a trip.
That would have been like a fever dream of a movie. And so, I mean, yeah, the character designs in this movie are kind of, unusual. But I mean, there are certainly, like, as for like plot-wise, it pretty much follows the same plot. They meet up. Oh, the Nazgul in this movie. In the Nazgul in this movie aren't really drawn. They're just kind of black figures with red eyes.
Yeah, hooded figures.
Yeah, and especially in the scene where Frodo, Pippin, Merry, and Sam have to hide like under the embankment, to evade a Nazgul. There's like almost no tension because the Nazgul looks really goofy. Like, I feel like that kind of happens with all the enemies in this movie. Like the orcs also are drawn like super dark, and the Nazgul are the same, and especially the Balrog.
Oh, the Balrog's design is very.
He looks
like a lion and a butterfly.
Yeah, he looks like he's a stuffed animal, the Balrog.
I mean, his wings are like twice as big as his body.
Yeah.
And he just it looks almost like a cutout like stick figure on like a popsicle stick that you just move.
Yeah.
Like against the backdrop.
Not exactly the most intimidating figure. Yeah. Like it's kind of like goofy to watch, but I mean like they couldn't really do anything. Like I don't think they could have like drawn an extremely intimidating Balrog. It's just I don't know if they just didn't have the imagination, but I think it was more like technical because I mean how they're not going to animate this huge monster like frame by frame. And I mean this movie, why don't we talk about some of the more unorthodox animation, like the rotoscoping?
Okay, yeah.
I mean,
like we said before, the rotoscope, it gives us a perspective and almost a more human-like feeling and look to these characters that we are dealing with. But saying that, sometimes we'll get like very, bland shots of like Frodo and the gang, and sometimes it'll be like very detailed, and it's a little jarring when it shifts sometimes because you're like, one time it looks like this, and then another second it looks like this, and it leads to some very interesting moments where like Frodo will be all bug-eyed for a few seconds, not doing anything or moving his mouth.
Yeah, I mean like especially there's this one scene that sticks with me, like when Pippin and Merry are captured by orcs, and the riders of Rohan come and battle the orcs, because you'll get this scene where Pippin and Merry are like crawling, and they're like animated regularly, but for when they're cutting to battle, the orcs, first of all, the orcs don't even have detail on them. They're pretty much just like black silhouettes with red eyes, and then you'll have the Riders of Rohan, who are obviously like rotoscoped since it's super detailed, and it'll keep cutting back and forth between Merry and Pippin like running around the battle, and the riders battling the orcs. And I'm not a big fan of like the changing styles, but I mean it's very, as you said, jarring.
I mean, it keeps you entertained, and it never loses your interest.
I mean, I guess. Other things in this movie, like the Balrog entire scene is a little strange, because you've got Gandalf like battling this giant stuffed animal looking thing. And then once Gandalf dies, or like falls down with the Balrog, there's like all the characters just kind of like look over the edge and don't say anything. Like, I don't know. If I... It was really weird to watch because the whole time I'm expecting like Frodo to start screaming no or someone to say something. But Gandalf, as he's dropping, he just says, "Fly, you fools," and that's the last line of dialogue in that entire scene.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, I'll be back later. All right. Don't worry about me.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like he died. It feels like he's gonna, like, go buy groceries and then come back.
No, he's just gonna catch a branch as he's falling down, and he'll be fine.
Oh, another weird scene is the scene where Gandalf actually comes back to Gandalf and becomes Gandalf the White. The scene is kind of weird because Gandalf like shows up on his horse and like obviously Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn are there. They're in like Treebeard's forest, and it's really weird because Gimli says, Gimli says, "Legolas, shoot him! It's Saruman." And Legolas just kind of stands there, doesn't do anything. Aragorn like kind of just holds his sword there, and then all their weapons burst on fire.
Yeah.
Like, what if that was actually Saruman? You guys would have done nothing. Like, it's not... I don't know, it seems like that, like, kind of, like, rip you out.
You talked about this character for a second right there, and I don't think we can get away without mentioning, but Treebeard's design.
Treebeard looks like a moving Dr. Seuss page.
Yeah, it reminded me very much of, like, the Molasses Swamp, Candyland, but also just... It's...
Like, he doesn't even look like a tree.
Yeah, it doesn't look like a tree. It just looks...
He looks like a bush.
Like a walking pile of moss.
He looks very strange. And, he doesn't even, like, speak slowly. He just kind of speaks like a normal person. It's very strange, especially for his design. Like, I expect he would have, like, the sooner I saw him, first I laughed, because, like, he looks really out of place. He does not look like he belongs in this movie. It looks like he belongs in a Dr. Seuss book. And then, like, as he was speaking, I didn't really know what to think. And Treebeard is definitely strange in this movie. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Again,
one thing I wanted to bring up that was probably supposed to have a lot more emotional weight than actually happened for us, because I remember us laughing quite a bit. But Boromir's death, it's very odd. So Boromir gets shot a few times with some arrows, and he's falling like against this like tree stump. It's very over dramatic, and he's just falling against the tree, and Sam and Frodo aren't doing anything, and then the Black Riders just come up to them basically and just grab them and throw them on the ground. Yeah. Like, they don't even try to run.
They don't try to, like, they move. They literally just watch Boromir get lit up like he's getting turned into a pin, a pin cushion.
Well, he doesn't try to move either. He's just like, this is my fate, and then he just gets shot a few times against a tree.
Yeah, and then they just kind of watch him get shot, and then at the very last moment when he's got like 7 arrows in him, they like finally move forward.
But he's like holding back against the tree, like in such a weird position. It's like he should not be standing right now.
And then he just gets bitch slapped, and they both fall, and that's it. That's the entire fight that they put up to save their friend. And another weird scene is, I think we said Sam and Frodo there, but that was actually Merry and Pippin.
Oh yes, my mistake.
And another weird scene is when Frodo puts on the ring after Boromir gets angry and gets on the boat. Because he's like, oh, this is bad. This is my burden to carry. And so he just gets on the boat and leaves. But the thing is, in this iteration, he still has the ring on when he gets the boat, so he's still invisible. And so when they're trying to find him, Sam is like, "Oh, I'll use the boat to try to find him," and he just happens to get in the same boat that Frodo is in. And like in the Jackson trilogy, it's like a really emotional moment because Frodo doesn't have the ring on, and Sam is like, "If you're going alone, then I'm coming with you," and he almost drowns himself to get to the boat so he can go with his friend. But here, Sam like he messes up getting into the boat and almost drowns himself, like with no incentive. And then Frodo,
He just wanted to go out for a little fishing.
yeah, Frodo's in the boat, so he takes off the ring, helps Sam up, and then they go. Like Sam is like a really big dummy in this movie. Like he honestly would have drowned there, and nobody would have saved him if Frodo wasn't invisible there. It's really kind of strange. And then you've got people like Galadriel in this movie when they go to Rivendell. And Galadriel's like this really tall, blonde-haired lady in this movie, and there's this really weird Mirror of Galadriel scene where Frodo just wants to just give up the ring to Galadriel.
I mean, she's basically as weird and just shows up for brief moments as much as the other trilogy.
It's kind of strange, but in the other trilogy, she's kind of like this oracle lady who's a bit spooky with her contrast-altering scenes. But here she just kind of laughs at Frodo, says no, and then leaves. I don't know, it's definitely a bit stranger here. And, I mean, like, we can talk about we can talk about more of the battle scenes. I mean, I guess...
I mean, the battle scenes are very just, what you would expect, except, we get these full-size people and, shadows and silhouettes of them marching and fighting one another.
Yeah. It's like, I guess it's really hard to do something like this in 1978. Especially when you're trying to incorporate rotoscoping. So it's definitely difficult, but I mean they did what they could with the technical elements that they had.
Definitely.
So I mean, this is definitely strange. But you know what? I think it's definitely a charming attempt.
Yeah, I definitely think it has its charms, and I think I would say it's worth its viewing at least once.
Yeah,
especially if you're, because I think for a lot of people, when they think of Lord of the Rings now, of course they think of the trilogy, Peter Jackson trilogy first, and rightly so. But I think it's also important to realize, like, hey, this was before that. This was first, and in many ways, this slightly inspired Peter Jackson for certain shots or scenes, maybe.
Yes, that is definitely for sure. You can definitely tell because I noticed while watching this that Peter Jackson incorporated like the exact same like shots, except in live action and with like real locations. You can definitely tell some shots were inspired.
Oh yeah, he probably grew up with this film.
Yeah, I think Ralph here was definitely limited by his time when making this movie. I feel like if he had like access to modern animation, he definitely could have like knocked this one out of the park.
It's interesting how Lord of the Rings adaptations always pick very unique directors compared to like their previous work. Just directors you would never expect to helm such a large franchise. But I guess that's good that they're getting people that focus more, that know the stories and care about the product.
I mean, Ralph was I don't know if his Lord of the Rings came out before or after some of his like more like well-known movies.
I know Wizards was the year before this, 1977. I forget what year Fritz the Cat was, but I'm pretty sure that was relatively earlier by a few years.
Yeah, and I mean like he's definitely his films are definitely like eccentric.
Yeah.
So
for lack of a better word, I mean.
Yeah. It's pretty hard to describe this It's like a fever dream. But I mean, and Peter Jackson, I mean, what was he known for before Lord of the Rings?
I mean, he had his debut Bad Taste, which was like a very low budget, like splatterfest, like almost alien invasion type film. He did Meet the Feebles, like in like 80, like the late 80s, which was almost like a very like dark take on like Muppets, and basically like imagine like very sleazy version of the Muppets.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, not talking about Happy Time Murders though. We don't talk about that film.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, they definitely gave the Lord of the Rings property to strange directors. I think they both got it right in their own way. But again, I definitely think this Lord of the Rings this iteration of Lord of the Rings is limited by its time. Yeah, definitely limited by its time. The animation.
I mean, yeah, we can live in a world of hypothetical of, well, maybe, if we had a second part, it would be a little better, the two as a whole. But that's just something we'll never know.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. Obviously, it's pretty like difficult to grade this fairly, like, because it never got finished. But
Yeah, I mean, it always sucks when a director or creator doesn't get to make their film or make their film in the way they exactly envisioned.
But hey, we live with what
we
we're
can only, yeah, we can only grade what we're dealt.
So yeah, I mean, like, yeah, you definitely got this movie. I think it's gonna be. I think like every Lord of the Rings fan should definitely give it a watch. And I think I would even recommend watching this before the Peter Jackson trilogy.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you a nice roots, and also just it shows like there's a lot of good in this, but also there are flaws, and it lets you realize. I think it gives you an appreciation. I think watching this gives you a bigger appreciation for the Jackson trilogy, but also watching the Jackson trilogy gives you a better appreciation for this.
Yeah, I mean the Jackson trilogy is obviously, really good. But I like to watch. I think when examining this movie, you gotta kind of put your head in like the 1978 space and just imagine watching this as if you had never watched anything. But I feel like this movie is also kind of fails as an introduction to Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah, it would be very tough to watch this without knowing anything about it because we're not given that background.
Yeah, this movie is 2 hours and 15 minutes long. It doesn't have the luxury of like explaining the world. So you pretty much have to have either read the books or watched the Jackson trilogy to really understand what's going on. Because if you don't know a thing about the Lord of the Rings world and you watch this, you're really not going to understand what's going on.
Yeah, I would never intentionally have this be someone's like first introduction to it, unless they were unless it was maybe a child. It would be tough to show this to like an adult and have them try and
understand.
Because I think a young child could, they'd still be in awe of the animation aspect.
I don't think young children watch Lord of the Rings for like the in-depth world building.
No.
I think they just kind of like people fight orc. But I mean, yeah. So I don't think you should ever like watch this if you don't know a thing about Lord of the Rings. I think you should either read the books first or watch the Jackson trilogy and then go back to this. But if you've read the books, then I think this is the first film iteration you should watch. Then you go to Jackson trilogy. But yeah, I think that it's, as I said earlier, it's a charming attempt.
Yeah.
It's got its ups, but I mean, it's definitely got its downs. I still, as much as I appreciate this movie, I still think that the Jackson, even just the Jackson Fellowship of the Ring, kind of like exceeds this. I mean, if you're just looking at this,
definitely.
if you're just looking at this on your own. I mean, they worked with what they had, and what they had was not a lot. So I think if you're just looking at this on its own, it's pretty decent. It's fun to watch with some pals. But
Agreed.
I don't think it exactly works as an introduction to Lord of the Rings, like the world of the Lord of the Rings, or exactly to like the whole scope of the story. But I mean, like, if you're not analyzing this movie like super in depth, I think it's fine to watch.
Yeah.
It's just good. It's good to it's fun to laugh at, and it's charming. So I mean,
I agree.
With that, why don't we move into our ratings here and final thoughts?
I mean, that was kind of our final thoughts for the most part, I would say. We touched about pretty much everything I think we wanted to talk about. But yeah, it's like you said, it's a charming film with a unique animation style that I think is just it's interesting to look at and watch and just think about how it came to be. And I think it's very fascinating to look at how it came about. I would probably give this film about I'd say a 5.5 or a 6. It's not an amazing film, but it's enjoyable.
I think it's a lot more enjoyable after you've like watched the Jackson trilogy or read the books. I think it's definitely charming to see what they attempted in 1978. But I mean, I think I'm gonna go ahead and give this movie a 6 out of 10, slightly above average. It's neat, but not amazing. It's not even like that great. But so I'm probably not gonna rewatch it anytime soon. This isn't on the list. But you know what? I enjoyed my experience watching it. Not a bad time.
Yeah, and that's Lord of the Rings 1978. We are officially now, after this bonus episode, we are done with Middle Earth and the Shire for at least a while. We're not doing the Hobbits anytime soon.
And after that, it was peace on Earth. There was no other movies ever made in the Lord of the Rings universe.
Maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, we'll eventually do the Hobbits. I'm sure we'll do them at some point, but not anytime soon that we have plans with. We have a lot of fun episodes coming up, which, stay tuned for. This is a bonus episode, so we're not giving any teases, but we'll have bonus episodes like this every once in a while when, there's maybe some other movie that we want to talk about for just short 30 minutes or something that kind of relates to something else we're watching.
When we've got something to bonus.
Yeah, when there's a bonus, we will bonus the episode.
There we are. And with that, thank you for watching. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.